Hello, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's UX Design webinar from Nemensa. Today, I'm joined with Hannah Tempest and Chris Richard, who are going to be running the webinar from UX to ROI, transforming e-commerce with user-centered design. So, based in our studio in Bristol, we have Hannah Tempest and Richard. Tripping over my words. Chris Richards. And for those who don't know Nemensa so well, Nemensa is a experience design agency. We're based in offices across London, Bristol, and Amsterdam. We're about 160 strong. We work right across a sort of full service offering, working across both the sort of corporate sector and government sector. And one of our kind of core cultures that have helped us, I think, on our successes over time is our kind of constant learning around design and sharing and discussing the kind of values and learnings from design. And so today it's really exciting to have Hannah Tempest, who is our experience strategy director. You've had the good fortune of working with some really quite formidable brands, from people like the David Lloyd gyms, with Treads as part of Halfords. We've also worked with big government departments in weather forecasting and big data with the Met Office, and big international kind of brands like Dropbox, which is an exciting opportunity. And sitting next to you, we have Chris Richards, who is our creative director. Chris, I think, equally to complement the kind of strategic experience and measuring of impact that Hannah brings, you're kind of bring sometimes a almost disruptive, but a kind of creative quality to the sort of services we offer in terms of really challenging those kind of the conventions we often tend to sort of take on board and bring that sort of innovation. You've worked with some great brands that are well established, but equally every brand to sort of maintain its sustainability in the market has to evolve. And I think you've been instrumental in people like Virgin Media in Ireland sort of evolving how their brand works. And you worked with Halfords Treads brand and sort of bringing to life. I'm going to hear a bit more about that today. But you've also been involved in innovating quite new brands and sort of really understanding and having that empathy for audiences and customers to originate new brand experiences and sort of open up new opportunities there. So welcome to you both. My name is Will Wells-Davis. I'm the Director of Design at Nemensa, and I'm going to be hosting today. So I'll be looking through questions that people have. So if you have a question during the talk, please enter them into the chat channel, and we will be reviewing them as they come in. And I think Hannah and Chris will be looking at how to respond to them as and how, because we want this to be quite conversational, quite kind of relaxed, join in. But equally, if we don't quite capture them, we can kind of review them at the end and we can pick them up then. So I think over to you, Hannah and Chris.
Thanks. Thank you, Will.
So, hello. We're actually going to kind of come in with quite a divisive title in bold. So quite bold in itself, how we added 29 million a year in revenue. So what we're going to talk to today is really to sort of validate that statement. So within our table of contents, we're going to be looking at the UCD today. Hannah's going to be talking about some nudge and sludge mechanics and also introducing us to the funnel. I'm going to be walking through some real world examples, and then together we're going to give you some key takeaways, really give you some value to go home with and think about.
Yeah.
So I guess really what we kind of want to open this up with is times have changed. Audiences have grown, they're familiar with standard practices and have higher expectations. So what do we mean by that? Well, obviously there's a very hot debate at the moment on AI and automation and how that's going to impact in context with this discussion, how that's going to impact retail and e-commerce. Another thing to talk about as well is I kind of got into this industry properly, I suppose, in sort of early 2015, 2016, and user experience design then was very focused on the internet as being a means of daily communication, especially after the smartphone revolution, moving into commerce via mobile and stuff like that. And it was very much about how do we kind of ensure from a usability perspective that perhaps kind of older generations are able to adapt to this. Whereas now that market has changed. Obviously, these are all still very relevant use cases, but millennial and Gen Z, people that have actually grown up with it, are very familiar with all types of software. Onboarding to them needs to be seamless and frictionless. Any form of labored experience is going to be a kind of no-no. So we need to think about this generation now as much more important than they were a while ago.
And they've got money now.
And they do have money now.
More
yes.
importantly, so younger generations are the ones that are controlling what gets spent and where. And so some of the kind of tricks that we might have used 10 years ago are maybe going to cut it with some of these new digital natives.
So this begs the question, is user-centered design even still relevant?
This is Chris's question because obviously it is, but sorry.
Yes, but why?
Well, it's super relevant today because although the tools have changed and although technology changes, one thing remains the same, which is humans still to date populate the earth and use all of these tools. So the fundamentals of user-centered design, human-centered design, remains the same. And then I think, especially if you work within the digital space and in technology, often we're using tools to do A/B testing or to like make tiny little adjustments to some of our experiences online, which is great and wonderful. But if you want to make a really big leap forward, rather than the small sort of 1% marginal gains of A/B testing, a user-centered design approach and getting a bit more formative information from real humans before you start designing and responding to that is the way to kind of really kickstart and build a good basis on which to experiment with all of these great tools and automations that exist now. And just in case, what do we mean when we say user-centered design? So we're talking about an iterative process in which we focus on the human beings that use a product or a service and what it is that they need from us at every single step, and responding to that using design as the tool with which we respond. And, you know, if a lot of the things that I'm working with daily and the things that clients are asking me is user-centered design sounds like a really nice thing to do, but how do we prove that it makes a big impact on the bottom line? How do I tell, I don't know, my boss or my shareholders that this approach is going to yield better results than the A/B testing tool we've been using for many, many years, for example? And ultimately, you can't prove anything unless you're measuring the right things. So to prove return on investment of our work, and like, yeah, the very audacious quote that Chris said at the beginning of making 29 million in revenue, we can prove that, and we can prove the ROI we calculate on that is in, like, I'm not a numbers person, in 8,000% kind of ROI on that type of like return. And how we do that is that we have to benchmark before we start what our current important metric is. And there's loads out there. So there's a few examples on screen, you know, satisfaction rating, you know, NPS. It's a different discussion about NPS, but, you know, lots of people use NPS. You've got conversion rates, you've got, you know, traffic, you've got kind of dwell time, you've got call center volumes, for example. All of these are really, really good metrics, but you might want to pick one or two for your user-centered design program rather than trying to constantly monitor all. As you become more mature, if you've got something that's been running for a longer period of time, it would probably be quite necessary to look at like loads of these all at once. But when we're starting out and the question is, how do I show people that the work we do is of value and that it ultimately improves the bottom line, not just improves the experience for humans, which is still a valid reason. These are the kind of metrics you might pick. So we're going to like look at some of the ones we've picked for the projects we're talking about today, which is around conversion rate, things like total order value, abandonments, those sorts of metrics, and that's how we can track how successful the design work we do is. I love using this kind of like way of talking about how we do stuff. It's called nudge and sludge. And what it is that ultimately every single human on this planet just wants to get the task they have to get done in the easiest possible way, right? We don't want to be spending loads of time having to call up. We don't want to have to kind of like fill in lots of authentication to be able to do things, even though sometimes we have to. And so we want to talk about how we help people get through this process by nudging them in positive directions and removing sludge, as in those awkward barriers, those slightly annoying tasks that sometimes have to be done. And on a really grand scheme, for example, people have talked about nudge in terms of organ donation, or pensions, right? So having a opt-in being the default means that the easiest thing to do is have a pension or potentially donate organs. When we're talking about sludge, a really famous and kind of quite timely one to think about would be, say, voter ID. It's not that those things are impossible to surmount, but it's a small barrier that stops a percentage of people from carrying out that task. So when we're looking at e-commerce and retail and how we get through the selling a product process, what we're looking at is making sure there's lots of really helpful nudges, so things like auto-filling addresses, quick pay options, that common questions are like answered contextually along your journey, and that we're finding sludge and eradicating it. So that means we don't require people to sign in to buy. If there's like lots of decisions to be made, we try and reduce that down so there's only 1 or 2 decisions, and we remove uncertainty throughout the whole process. And you know, the reason we might do that is because this helps us have a really healthy funnel. I'm sure you're all familiar with the cold sales funnel and the like dodgy stock photos of funnels out there of like how people move through consideration stage, when they start kind of thinking about buying stuff, when they're like ready to do it, and when they take action upon like buying something. What we don't want is that funnel where we're kind of working out, oh, I've heard of this thing, I would quite like this thing, I'm buying this thing. That funnel is confusing if it has dead ends, if it has narrowings, if it has you know, weird little cul-de-sacs. You will find that stops people using your system for buying products or signing up or whatever it might be. It means that every barrier we lose a chunk of people because they can do it simpler elsewhere, or maybe they just don't feel like it right now. You know, there's lots of things going on in everyone's lives, lots of distractions, and anything that seems a bit too arduous will probably be abandoned. Ultimately, nobody likes a dead-end funnel. And some of the types of things we see in like bad dead-end funnels, I don't know why I looked at you. It's things like, you know, really narrow entry points, so it's very difficult to find your way into the sales process. Once you're there, maybe it's unappetizing surroundings, so the products just look kind of gross in the way that they're presented. There's dead ends and confusing routes, things like working out, do I pay by finance? Is there a discount? How do I get it? How do I apply it? There's unanswered questions or unresolved inquiries, so things like, can I send this back for free if I don't like it or if it doesn't fit? There's unclear progress. You know, am I on 1 step of 28 or 1 step of 3? Because if it's just 3, then yeah, I can probably persist with this. And then just, you know, barriers, blockages, and a lack of shortcuts. And usually when we're talking about shortcuts, we're talking about things like Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, although, I don't know, sometimes that's not always a shortcut, but maybe that's just like, I've had a bad week with it. Ultimately, what we want is to make our funnel into this, the funnel queen of return on investments, because we can break down the interventions that user-centered design can give us into these different sections. If you're not familiar with the terrible acronym TOFU, MOFU, BOFU, it's top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. And then hopefully throughout that, we build a bit of advocacy, meaning people like us and they might come back. So ultimately, right up at the top, TOFU, you need a wide net. So we need to be able to be getting as many people as possible into that funnel. Obviously, you can just throw money at the problem and buy a lot of advertising, and many people do. But there's lots of organic ways of getting that funnel to be wider as well, and allowing lots of things in. And we're going to talk about how we might create constellations of highly related content to bring in more customers at that top end. Once you're in the middle, this is where you're kind of like thinking about the products, you're looking at them, you're investigating them, interrogating them. And this is where you really need these premium and informative experiences. This bit needs to be, you know, gorgeous. It needs to look like a beautiful product page, lots of informing and delighting at every single turn. And then we get back down to the bottom of the funnel. Now, at the bottom of the funnel, as in the picture, needs to be narrow. We need to narrow focus, remove distractions, make it as simple as possible. So answer all unknowns, reduce cognitive load at every single possible moment. When I say cognitive load, for those not into the lingo, what I mean is don't make me think. It's hard. I have to think about all sorts of things outside of this web experience. So anything that's an additional kind of decision I need to make or puzzle I need to solve is going to be really, really hard for me, and I would prefer not to. TOFU. So I'm going to show you some real world examples. Also, if you're finding us using stupid words for stuff tiresome, bad news, we are going to keep doing it. Ultimately, loads of people have all sorts of very serious papers about all of this kind of stuff published, but I don't find that it sticks in my head unless I've got some sort of tortured analogy to help me through, which is why, yeah, we tend to kind of use some weird terminology. But I'm really hoping it will really help to kind of help it stick in there and remind you next time you're on a process that, oh yeah, this is that thing that those guys were talking about. So up at the top, what we want to do is create constellations of content. Why? Well, your product is lovely, and I'm sure you've got a wonderful team who make it beautifully described, great images, all tagged up, highly accessible. You know, it's 2024. This stuff is done. No one's really ruining this in terms of e-commerce space. But that means if I'm a user looking for that product, if I have a wider footprint in the SEO sense, so across the internet that Google can find, I have many more entry points to that product and many more opportunities to answer the questions that users are actually asking. So often people come into products or services not through looking directly for it. So we're going to show you some bike examples. So I'm going to use that quite a lot. I might be looking for a particular racing bike, but I might come into that by finding an interesting article that's very inspiring about someone doing a big race or preparing for a big race. I might want a particular bike, but I'm worried about how to put custom tires on it. And so a help and support article about how to do that could be a way of bringing me in. Maybe I just like the idea of going out with my friends on my racing bike on a Sunday morning, and maybe lifestyle type videos, photography, and media is going to bring me into that product. Or maybe it's about the expertise. I want to know, what does someone who has won a load of races think about the best racing bike out there? In which case I might be looking more for a sort of review or that kind of social proof type content. So when designing product pages and designing how products fit into an ecosystem of an online space, we need to think about how we create highly connected pieces of content that widen out that net and allow more people to come across that type of product. And so we sometimes use the analogy of making your product into the center of your content sandwich.
So just to kind of give that into more of a visual context with a brand that I'm sure we're all familiar with, Patagonia. I didn't consciously put this on today. But if we look at the constellation that surrounds this brand, is that there's more to the experience than just buying the end product. And the funnels in which you can kind of get there looking at that tofu level really helps people kind of buy into that brand advocacy. So the surrounding images that you can see there that lead to that kind of product price point in the middle really help kind of sell that dream. So we have on one side, we have this constellation talking all about the sort of the real world stories of these people that use the brand day in, day out as a part of their lifestyle. So it's lots of kind of insights and education around climbing and other adventure sports in which this brand feels like it belongs to.
Did you say inspo?
Yes.
Okay.
And then in the middle, we have the more of the kind of, I guess, activism side of Patagonia. So being able to kind of really lean into what they are doing, the impacts that they're making to kind of really solidify how their products are made in a sustainable manner, how they're actively helping communities and the planet. And then also on the other side, we have this kind of almost microsite that allows people to search for their campaigns that are going on in their area. So if we think about that constellation that kind of really tie into Patagonia as a brand, you can see how that kind of really helps that advocacy and people buy into it instead of just seeing it and basing it solely on its aesthetic appearance.
Because it's a brown t-shirt ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. That t-shirt isn't that great. I prefer a white one with it tucked in the corner, but I didn't see that. I was, oh, it's cool to have Patagonia because of all the stuff in it. So yeah, okay.
Convert.
Converse.
So there's loads of other benefits as well as like an SEO footprint. There's loads of other benefits of having constellations of content around your products. One is you build brands, you let people know about your values, what you're all about. It lets you build community. So a great way of generating fantastic content is user-generated content, getting influencers or other people who are just like really passionate about your products. I mean, when we're talking about bikes, there's loads of people super passionate about bikes, from people who are racing, people who go out every weekend and do like really difficult runs and share those videos of them going down the like spine of a mountain or whatever that make you feel not good, or like, you know, bike dogs. Those are great. That's great content. So you can build that community out in a way that you might find quite surprising. And it's also an amazing space to flex your people's knowledge. So most brands that we work with, they have people who work for that organization who know everything in and out about every product there. They're really passionate about it. You know, maybe they have like a physical store. Those people who work in that store know what kind of things people are asking. So they're great people to get involved in creating content that really speaks to real world users. And it also allows you to blend help and support into those journeys. And why that matters is that often a reason people won't complete a purchase is that they have an outstanding question or a query. So if you're able to answer that earlier on, so I'm maybe looking at a particular product and it tells me how to size it right, and it tells me how to add accessories to it, for example, then I'm not going to get to the checkout and go, oh, actually, I need to go and find that stuff out first. So there's lots and lots of really good benefits to creating these constellations as well as the SEO. And coming back to second, is this second or third analogy? I can't. Yeah, we said tofu already. Yeah, second analogy of the day is often what we'll refer this content to around the product is the bread, right? You've got your product in the middle. These black squares are maybe your catalog of all of your lovely different things that you're selling. And these sections above and below are really great places to potentially add these constellations of content. And you might change that depending on how complex or how high value those products are. So if you're selling a very expensive bike, for example, I might want quite a lot of supportive content. I want to see someone riding down the dragon's back on that particular bike, or I want to see how to add the like specialist pedals to it. I want to know that this famous racer also has this bike and has reviewed it here for me, for example. Whereas if you're selling something simpler, although one of the things we found is nothing's 100% simple. You might want a little bit less. If you're just selling some lug nuts, for example, then maybe you just want to have a little video on how to fit them, or a little bit on help and support about which ones you're definitely going to need for your particular model. So you can flex this bread into either a big like fat sandwich or a little Danish open face kind of thing, right?
That bread, yeah.
Look, a taco? No. And just like how that might look, and this is kind of wireframey, so you're going to have to like use your imagination a bit. But when we started looking at how we might do this with bikes, hopefully you can see we've got like a beautiful catalogue of lots of different products in the middle, and we are working out what types of questions are people asking when they're considering buying this product. For us, there isn't a shortcut to that other than talking to humans and finding out before we've built anything what their mental process is for buying that £12,000 bike. And there's a lot of checking, a lot of research that goes on before we even get to the website. And if we can intercept that journey through making great content that kind of allows us to be part of that researching phase, we've got a much better chance of being chosen as the person who ends up selling that particular product to them. So we're looking at things like promotional items. We're looking at things like expert reviews, size guides, have you picked the right bike? And then also looking at like amazing products that we want to push within that catalog as well, and bringing that up into the top of that kind of bread zone. And Chris is going to show you some real examples that aren't gross blocks of color, but hopefully you can understand a little bit what we mean when we're talking about flexing the kind of content bread on your product catalog.
Cool. So we're now going to move into the MOFO. So it's the middle of the funnel. To be fair, there is still a little bit of toe in there, but primarily talking about the next step down, what that looks like. So first one to really think about is how we provide ROI with tonality and mindful use of systemizing. So if we go on to the first, like, what do we mean by that? So I've broken that down into a few different sections. And the first one is to consider and respect all of your products at all levels and price points. So one thing that we discussed, I think, early on when we were looking at the bikes is there was a lot of inspiration on direct-to-consumer websites. We tend to find that direct-to-consumer websites in context with products such as bikes, they have their own internal design teams. They have lots of time to be able to curate all of this visual constellations and curated content, which really helps sell it. But how would this work when we're applying to a much kind of wider catalog and a larger marketplace? So we kind of first sort of, I guess we started getting quite heavy in thinking about that from a design system perspective. But we really wanted to ensure that we made each product work in a consistent format. So if you go to, yeah, thank you. So what we're looking at here is an example of a 12 grand bike. So a really high ticket product, a high value product versus a $5.99 Bolt. And what's interesting about it is we're using the exact same template and we're giving both of the products the same highlight. So what's quite interesting is from a more business perspective is although the $5.99 is a lower price point, what they would sell of those in a year would outweigh perhaps the once purchase of 12 grand once every 2 years. So in a sense, although it doesn't cost to the user, it doesn't look like it's as expensive to the business it is. So therefore itself requires as much kind of love and attention and ease and usability as the core product does, a larger product price point. And just to kind of give you a little bit more of a step up from those, just a tiny step up from those wireframes we saw earlier, we were looking at that kind of idea of being able to really take a product and give it its own constellation. So here we're looking at the mountain bike results page. So of course the results are on there in a nice kind of playful grid format, but at the top and bottom we have some nice bread. So we've got some interesting content around like latest bikes that have come in, some help and support guide here, which tires should you buy for which bikes, product features. Then at the bottom, we've got a nicer component that sort of displays perhaps a new bike in. And if we move on to the next one, we compare this same structure to perhaps more of a curated environment where it isn't a specific type of product, but actually a group of products contextually related to race ready. So here we're able to create a race ready hub. So this is a really nice constellation. It starts to go more into that route of which Patagonia we're looking at wider touch points. So here we have an example of lots of different pieces of content that can create an individual that's looking to take quite a serious competitive race on. So we've got helmets, we've got jerseys, we've got bikes, and the type of contextual information from more of an insight perspective is kind of more some like blog articles, some more support, and going into more of the kind of comparison detail of different types of road tires. So what's interesting is, going back to that first point, okay, yeah, so it's all well and good, you've got these really nice products, but how would you create a environment like this for tires, for example, and would that work? Well, yeah, it does actually, because you can still use this same method and apply the same amount of constellation content to it within your bread. So what we're looking at here is, again, kind of like new tires, support, advice, and being in a position where we kind of have given the product its own space to breathe within the layout, really kind of adds this extra level of depth to it. And it's funny, while we were designing this, we weren't really like professional by any means in terms of being cyclists, but we suddenly found ourselves going, oh, you know what, this tire is kind of cool.
It's really nice.
I
I was
yeah.
quite tempted by the tires.
Yeah,
They do look cool.
It elevates that product to the same level as the really higher price points.
I did end up buying the tires because I did the cycle to work route through, and ended up buying the tires as well. So you know, there you go.
Converted herself.
There you go, one sale.
So appropriate offer prompting. I think this is your bag.
Yeah, I was going to talk a bit about this. So I'm sure we're all super familiar with these types of sites, right? Where you're buying something cheap, you're buying something often really weird and random, and it's got so many offers, so many countdowns, only 2 left, or throwing everything, social proof, the kind of scarcity, throwing all of these tools, and a lot of a lot of A/B testing platforms will just layer on top anxiety layers of like stuff for people. It's got a kind of, it does definitely move the dial a little bit on how many people buy, but it erodes trust in the brand. And if you're looking to create long-term advocacy rather than a quick buy, this kind of like bargain basement style application, Price Drop TV, is the kind of thing that is going to get you some like short-term gains, but long-term could erode your brand's value. However, quite rightly, you're going to have a marketing team who needs to do promotions. They need to push certain things. They need to be able to sell different aspects and have the flexibility. So when we're creating systems, or we're creating that middle of the funnel experience, we have to think about the tools and the levers that we're providing for a marketing team or a product team to push certain things. So when we're creating them, we would make things like little ribbons that would push stuff outside of the kind of main screen, that sit outside of the main experience and are consistently there. So some offers kind of little fella on here. We create like hero areas that are highly flexible and able to be managed in a quite granular way. Things like product tiles and having lots of different types of labels available for them. Things like in stock now, or like low stock levels, for example. Using product kind of sliders so that we can kind of put more things onto more pages if we want to push certain collections, promo cards and lockups, and making these curated experiences, which Chris is going to talk about a little later, as a way of pooling together things that are often bought together. And that's the type of thing that later, when you've got your data in order, you can start feeding into potential AI tools, or feeding into promotion engines that allow you to do next best offers or things like that. But ultimately, we have to think about the the marketing team and the promotions team as a user, because if we create stuff that doesn't give them these levers, they'll find ways of putting them in, which maybe break the system or erode that trust and end us back up at that like price drop TV kind of experience that we're trying to avoid.
So I think it's an interesting point on that. So we'll double back around to it later, but the idea of designing a system that is too focused on a hygiene and JIRA ticket requirement, not necessarily what the team needs in order to create something that looks good and works without going price drop TV style. So this one is kind of ROI with site retention, embracing sub-brands. So one of the challenges that we experienced as well was that, especially when looking at a marketplace site as opposed to direct to consumer, we found that there is a potential where lots of users might kind of browse multiple sites, and like, how do we keep them in place? And Treads had so many amazing like sub brands of all different types of bikes. We were trying to come up with a solution to kind of keep them on site. So what we ended up doing is kind of creating these hubs. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. We were creating these nice hubs, which kind of felt like the experience started to move itself into almost like a fashion sector. We were looking at lots of kind of clothing and fashion sites in order to embrace this context within the cycling world as well. So if we look at two brands here that are worlds apart in terms of what they do and their price points. So Fox is kind of a very much a mountain biking, I guess, sort of more youthful brand, whereas Castelli is an Italian, like high-end, elite sports brand. Like the types of personas that we knew were looking at Castelli had like a range of 15 to 20,000 pounds bike. So there's like the top of the top. Whereas Fox is, compared to that, quite entry level when we come to costings. But what we're looking at here is we're kind of wanting them to stay in that side, because they might see a Fox product and then they might go elsewhere, where actually if we can give them the Fox or the Castelli feel, but still within the confines of the general functionality and design of Treads, then the aim is that we would keep them in sight and keep them on page a little bit more. So at the top, we got some nice bread, and then like if we go to the next slide, and then we start to go into that familiar kind of product showcase here. So having lots of opportunity to have cutouts versus images, and giving the sub brands their own space to kind of look great.
Yeah. And this is a thing that direct to consumer brands do incredibly well. So if you were to buy, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example. Mattresses are having a renaissance, right? There's like three or four, there's a few mattress companies that have really lovely web experiences that are very much speaking to their customer, that show them everything beautifully laid out, and it's easy to do. They've got like 10 or 12 products, whereas we're looking at a catalog of tens of thousands of different products, but wanting to hold on to something of the personality of those brands. And so by creating neutrality in the system, we're allowing those brands to really like sing and really look like they look cool, right? I mean, they look really different. They make me want to wear Lycra, which usually is not on my shopping list. So they're doing a good job, I would say.
Absolutely. So going back to what we were saying earlier, then this idea of design components for journeys, not features. So what do we mean by that? I think that a lot of brands we work with have these large teams internally, and they really want to be able to have a set of components that gives them opportunity to go beyond what we refer to as hygiene components that would exist within any design system. Things like, drop downs, form elements, accordions, etc. We're talking about how do we create a bespoke component that allows them to think about it as a journey. So they've got a new product in, perhaps it's a new bike, perhaps it's a new jersey, perhaps they've got an affiliation with a new brand and they've got a whole set of new products that are coming in. How do we create them a design or components that can help them create that journey more visually? So we had got a few examples to whiz through here. So one of them, we kind of tapped again into more of the very sort of fashion style, this idea of getting the look. So get the look concept is quite fun in context with a marketplace of different types of bikes. So 2 examples we have here is that kind of, I guess, your sort of urban street cyclist that is, you know, pretends it's not about fashion, but it is. So they want to look cool and ride well. And then you have your just like, look, it's raining, I live in Wales and I need to get to work. I need something that's like ergonomic, but also, you know, good quality, good production. So the same component works there. And you think about the team internally that will be doing that, because they can take this further. It might not necessarily lead with a jersey or a bike, but it might be how do we have a group of products that are featuring, you know, autumn differences between tires for winter versus summer, differences between different types of products to help clean. This one lockup kind of works very kind of versatile from that perspective. And again, kind of like being able to promote, almost have contained microsites. So I mentioned earlier about starting properly UX in 2015, but actually I've been around much older than that. Yeah, I've been around before the smartphone. But this kind of we're almost there's like a renaissance of having almost microsites that are embedded within pages. So depending on optimization and lagging and stuff like that, it would be nice to be in a situation in which this one component has its own interaction states of scrolling and clicking and popping up and going through images. So being able to have a product showcase within the page as the user scrolls down, that again kind of like opens up a world of opportunities to think about the teams that are creating and what that journey looks like. And then final one here is kind of, I guess it's sort of a challenge to the classic carousel where we might have, you know, top 10 bikes. So let's look at the mountain bike, let's look at the gravel, let's look at the hybrid, or we might have essentials for riding, and we've got a mix of different products here. And we always have the lifestyle shop, a closest lifestyle shop that represents the energy of the products. I think this is key, because from a minimalist perspective, it would still work quite nice without that lifestyle shot there, but the lifestyle shot just adds weight to that kind of experience and helps put users in the mindset. Although that specialized bike, you might notice, isn't on there, but that's done deliberately because it feels like you're selling that kind of dream of these extra things that are beyond just the core product. Cool.
Cool. So we're down at the bottom of the funnel now. And so, as I said at the top, this is really about making things as simple as possible and making sure people don't get lost. This is like your key opportunity for your potential customers to go wandering and go, I'll just check I can't get it cheaper elsewhere, or I'll just check that there's free returns on this. So one of the early things you can do is reduce that choice and use some progressive disclosure to keep things simple, to make sure we're not giving people like decision paralysis with 20 different things to potentially go and mess around with. I put this stat on because sometimes, you know, the data and authenticating users is super valuable. We all know that we can personalize experiences brilliantly if people sign in and use their accounts. But you know, there's a few figures out there, but between 43 and 56% of shoppers use the guest checkout. And that's even if they have an account. It's just how people prefer to shop when they just want to get something kind of quickly. And ultimately, you have to make a bit of a decision of, do you want the data or do you want the sale? And that's, you know, a great discussion to have when you're talking with your kind of like stakeholders and project sponsors. Some other things to kind of think about, these are just terms and to think about as you're kind of making a look at your usually like checkout baskety type journey. The first one is it's about simplification. Is there anything on screen that doesn't need to be on screen? So in this example, there are catalog numbers that are pulled through. And when we, you know, talk to users and talk to people who work in the warehouse, they don't really need to show that on the web experience. Sometimes people can bring that to them and they can find a product, but equally they could bring the name and they would find it just as well. So why are we cluttering up that space with this piece of information? It's also about reduction. Like, so in this example, you know, you've got different calls to action, continue to card payment, apply for finance, check out with PayPal, pay with Apple Pay, lots and lots of different ways of instigating action in people. And although choice is great, decision paralysis is something that kind of slows down people when they're trying to make a purchase. So you might want to think about reducing that down, explaining in some other way all of the choices that would be available, but making a very clear one action, so that people are kind of like really tunnel vision on what they need to achieve. And the same with things like voucher codes or like additional information. Can we hide it? You know, certainly some people are going to explore that type of content. However, 95% of people might be here just to buy a bolt and they don't need any of this stuff. So let's make sure that those people can complete their sale super effectively. And you can see afterwards some of the tools we've used there is consolidating some of those things together. So rather than having savings in 5 different places, just having it in one place consistently. Reassurance. So as I was saying, this is a point where people often might like to go and check if other retailers have things at the same price or cheaper. Lots of organizations do price matching, meaning that they'll pay you the difference if you find it cheaper elsewhere. So just putting that on there, making it really visible that that's a guaranteed like good price. And if you find it cheaper, you can still get that money back, is, you know, usually enough to tip someone over into kind of like completing that task. Expanding on all of the different options available to you is really, really great, but also being able to kind of hide different information and allow people to explore in their own way rather than putting all of those choices up front usually means that you get a little bit of less cognitive fatigue. My next arrow is actually under my face currently. Hang on. So another thing that lots of organizations do is that they do incentivize the actions. So for example, if you sign up and put your email in, you can get £5 off in lots of organizations. So sometimes that's enough to tip someone over, or maybe they found it £5 cheaper somewhere else, but if they're going to get a £5 off here, maybe this experience makes it worthwhile. And then this is the really key thing: answer everything. Any outstanding question has to be answered by this point, or there will be an abandonment or a wandering off. So that's things like, can I send it back? If it's the wrong size, what will happen? Is the delivery free? How much will it be? How do I get help? And then another key thing is just to allow room for complexity. Yes, it's cheaper if everyone self-serves, but if you're selling a very high-end item, they might just want to talk to someone and get some reassurance that, you know, the size is right, this is the model I want. It's a lot of money to spend. So allowing a live chat, for example, to be able to talk to someone and get some real advice is incredibly helpful. And, you know, Treads and many others have like wonderful customer service teams who are really, really knowledgeable and want to be able to talk to people. So let's use that and make sure that it's part of kind of like these high-end sales processes. And then, yeah, just some of the ways that we might do that is just to contextually answer questions as you're kind of moving along. So rather than have all information in everyone's faces, if you decide you're going to use this particular bank method, for example, that's when we give you that information about what types are available, whether it's secure or how it works. When you've chosen shipping, that's when we'll give you all of the prices and all of the different options for you, rather than bombard you with it before you've made a choice. So this kind of like embedding contextual answers along the journey, just gives that feeling of it being an intuitive experience. Like, oh my God, I was just about to ask that, and it's right here. That's kind of what we want our clients to feel.
So we double back round again to the opening statement. So that is how all of those within that funnel is how we kind of got to that point in this figure. So, you know, we had a 95% increase in high value items within 7 seconds, 5% checkout conversions, as well as that kind of increased revenue. So all of those kind of things together within Treads have kind of got us to that point. So it's, like I say, it's a process that we use on a lot of our clients, but we wanted to share it with you today to kind of break it down. And then we want to leave you with some takeaways.
Okay. So 1, user-centered design is more relevant than ever. And if you want to make a big leap forward rather than a marginal gain, user-centered design is the best way of doing that.
2, can't prove return if you don't measure things correctly. So that's what we meant to before, the importance of kind of really making sure that we nail those metrics, and we're not doing all of them, we're doing the ones that are most important.
Yeah. 3, add nudges and de-sludge your funnel. Nobody likes a sludgy funnel.
I said not to put that one.
You made me take that out.
Okay. So 4, content your product sandwich. So again, okay, we're really bad for our metaphors, but make sure that when we're looking at those constellations, we have that nice kind of bread that goes with the meat of the sandwich.
5, make all products shine from your 12-gram bike to your lug nuts.
Yep. 6, mindful promotions. Let's not go down that price TV route. As easy as it sounds and as quick as those wins might be seductive, let's be mindful about the potential impact that will have long term.
7, that direct to consumer vibe of like being able to describe stuff really well, showing the brand, giving it space to breathe. It really, really works for lots of things. And there are ways of bringing that into a marketplace type experience as well.
And 8, design journeys, not features. So this is what we spoke about earlier. It's all well and good thinking about a design from this hygiene perspective, but let's think about how we kind of create systems and designs that enable teams to kind of think about this as a journey and make them essentially have a good time creating stuff.
And 9, narrow the focus at that conversion point. Make sure that we remove any superfluous decision making and that we give people the answers to any questions they have in the context of their journey.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you both. And if anyone's got any questions, then please do add them into the chat. I have a couple myself.
Okay.
And I think this is often a cheeky question, maybe, but
Oh, no.
we talked a little bit about how sometimes when we do research, we learn things that perhaps are not what we expect. Like you don't always get the answers we expect. I'm just wondering, maybe in Treads, or maybe in another client, maybe or another context, what sort of learnings, and we talked a lot about Treads, what learnings did surprise you from that research, and made you really challenge some of those sort of findings?
That's a great question. So I think one that stands out to me is that quite early on when we started engaging and doing interviews with lots of users, actually before we even did that, we had a lot of debate about who it was we were going to talk to, who were the core people who really used this service. And one of the things that we really discovered was that it was way, way broader than we might have expected. You know, there's a certain idea of who it is that is the market for high-end bikes and lycra and like kit, right? And it turns out there's a lot of other people who really, really are into this stuff who might not always come up in your classic demographics. So we had a really wonderful practitioner on this who pushed all of us to widen our thinking and have a really diverse and inclusive recruitment process. And we spoke to some amazing people. We spoke to some 19-year-old racers. We spoke to a guy who was on his 60th year of racing and cycling, as well as people who were not identifying in the classic groups of like, you know, male, female cyclists, and like thinking about things a bit differently and thinking about how we make sure we speak to all those audiences. So I think that was really exciting and a really great challenge from the team to kind of keep us all thinking bigger about who it was we were going to talk to.
That's great. Yeah.
No worries.
But there is a question coming around how do you consider this would work for more bespoke or personalized products? And I think you talked a lot about associating content and products, and maybe useful to sort of maybe unpack how do you do that, and maybe how does that inform these sort of much more personalized experience that we often talk about? Registered users, or maybe other ways we can learn about users as they explore the site.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we would identify, I guess, from very top of the funnel in a bespoke context, assuming that what we're talking about is something in which a user needs to apply for a product to be almost curated for them in a way that the needs are very different. So perhaps that kind of goes into how we kind of would work about identifying those problems earlier on. I think that there's lots of kind of almost out of the box solutions on the onboarding process that tends to come to mind with those types of things. Making that as frictionless as possible, and then I guess depending on what the context of the product is, being sensitive with that information perhaps.
Yeah, because what you don't want to get, especially with personalization and personalized journeys, is that kind of like uncanny valley thing, where you sort of like popping up kind of like that Clippy type experience, right? Of sort of like, oh, I noticed you were looking at this 3 weeks ago. Would you like to talk more about how you were thinking about buying that particular tire? You know, it can feel a bit creepy and a bit like stalkery if you kind of get that. So your experiences need to feel a bit more seamless than the kind of like, you know, Clippy kind of example. It's a really
help me choose stuff.
And it's a really great, if you've got personalized stuff. And you know, my assumption there, by the way, by personalized is that you mean you're talking kind of a one-to-one type relationship with people rather than a big catalog of products. You have like a lot of information about the type of content and the type of constellations that would make sense for that particular user. So you've got much more opportunity to do things like on the metrics, increase your total order value type metrics, maybe, rather than conversion rate necessarily. But also you've got kind of a chance there of making those questions that you're answering throughout the process really personalized as well. If you know someone is interested in a certain area, you're going to answer those types of questions about the product along that contextual kind of route better than if they were just like some rando who you don't know who they are. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Depends what kind of, unless you meant like specially engraved products, in which case I don't know. I don't have an answer.
There is a question that
Yeah.
looks at maybe more specialist sort of sizings or I guess real specifics that may have, and I know, but we work with Virgin, and sometimes if you don't live in the right area, then suddenly some product may not be relevant. So you've got to you've got to come clean in a way, you've got to be honest.
Bold transparency, absolutely.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being seduced by something and then realize it's not actually possible. So yeah, maybe seduced is the wrong term. Excited again.
And we talk about trade, you're working with an existing kind of library of products.
Yeah.
Tell me how much you know, as a couple of comments come through, you're talking about there's quite a necessity of content. How much content are you working with which exists already? How much
that's a really good point.
Kind of labeling and what sort of how disruptive were you in terms of dealing with what they have?
So I think well, I have a thought. Did you have a thought?
I was going to say with that one of the pushbacks we had when we were looking at the product pages and the catalog pages was we haven't got time to like make it look as good as direct to consumer, because you know, if we look at Cannondale Specialized, you know, they've got maybe, I'm saying, you know, like everyone knows, but maybe they've got 20 to 30 bikes and they can spend, you know, sprint on each bike. Whereas we've got like over 3,000, like sometimes closer to 5. There's only 2 or 3 of us. We can't do that. And we knew that from ground zero. So in the design system, we made sure that the content that was pulled through was able to work in a nice container. So all of the containers are considered in size, and the background color that's in those containers is considered to be neutral to work on all types of products. So we were stress testing as well. Like not only does that sort of 25 grand Cannondale look nice, but also a lug looks nice because that's all going to be pulled in.
And that doesn't require human intervention to make that image.
There's pretty much no intervention in that.
And I think with the content thing, what you may often find is that everyone has quite a bit of content, but it's not in a state where you could dynamically surface certain things. So for example, maybe you have loads and loads of content on mountain biking in Wales, but it's not tagged up and it's not dynamically available. So really, to make any of this work and to make it work without loads of human intervention, it's an information architecture problem to tag up and categorize all of your content. And then it's not that difficult to make a component that says, when this component is on the page, display something with a tag mountain bike and a tag help. And it goes in there. So it's not a manual process to put all of these pieces of content out there, but it is a manual process to categorize your work, tag it up, create a meaningful taxonomy, and label things correctly. So yeah, it's like that's a nerdy like task you have to do, but that gets you ready for AI, it gets your data ready for all sorts of tools, it allows you to do dynamic stuff without human intervention. So that bit of work up front will allow you to have a lot of much easier implementation of this type of thing. I hope that makes sense.
And then maybe keeping on the customer side, I think the other side, you talk about affecting the funnel.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you could we talk about benchmarking at the beginning, I guess benchmarking towards the end, and I guess there's forecasting in terms of where do we expect it to behave. I want you to just share a bit of light in terms of that sort of outcome when you've then got that sort of relationship between products and content. What impact does that have on search optimization and its findability?
Yeah, so I mean, as we always say, you know, treat Google as a user, right?
PK. If PK is watching.
Yeah. That's his favorite. So, you know, Google's algorithm currently is really focused on usability. So if things are usable and findable to humans, Google will enjoy consuming that type of thing. So making things well structured, well labeled, predictable, repeatable, all of those things make Google like your content more and thus make your SEO increase. So you will have more organic kind of reach, basically. So yeah, think about a usable website is a good SEO site usually. And what isn't anymore good is stuffing a page full of keywords and hoping that that means it goes up. Google's kind of onto you on that one. So you need to start thinking about these constellations and tagging them together because they create an organism that is bigger than the sum of its parts.
And we have noticed recently as well, we've had a few briefs have come in where we need to analyze and review content ready for LLMs. So we mentioned artificial intelligence earlier, but in context with that, I think you need to be considering these things as well, so that when you do make that jump to Copilot, then you're ready, your content's ready.
Nice. And now, just I have one last question, and hopefully it might inspire some more questions to come in. So if you have any more, to add them into the chat. But you talk also about the marketers, and the websites are very much a tool for marketers, and it's there for them to resource. Maybe you could unpack a little bit more in terms of how do you build that relationship? How do you understand the sort of activities or needs of the marketers with the kind of website and then the customer and the dynamics that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I have a thought, but do you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
I think a lot of the time when you work with products and brands, the marketers tend to be like really into the products anyway, because unless it's like so huge that you've somehow found yourself in this job, most of the time a part of you being successful to work at this place is that you have love for the product. So they've always got so much insight. So just kind of working with them at that kind of early stage in the discovery processes and understanding, I think really helps give them a unique opportunity to be able to voice something that they've always wanted. And this is beyond, I think when we talk about like users, sometimes we focus too much on the end user, but the actual internal user, the client itself, we always consider them as well. I
would like to redact that we focus too much on the end user.
I'm talking about the industry as a whole. I'm talking about the industry as a whole. Yeah.
But no, I think you're right. One of the really early conversations I had, not just on this project, on many others, has been it's almost like having a bit of a therapy session with your marketers, because often they'll ask you, I just want to be able to do this. And if you unpack, what are you actually trying to achieve? Give me the problem, not the solution. They'll go, well, I just want to be able to very quickly change the sale and like make it really visible really quickly. And you're like, oh, okay, great. Well, I can make something to do that. You don't actually need that thing. And sometimes it's also explaining some of the basics of dynamic content delivery. Remember seeing a marketeer pale and kind of like grey faced as we were talking about publishing all of this content, and we realized later that up till this point they had been coding every single page, which had taken them hours, obviously. And so when we were saying, so we'll just do like what 20-30 per product or whatever, they were like, like obviously terrified. And when we showed them that actually when we make a system, you don't have to do any of that anymore. You just need to use the tools we've given you and kind of put some content into it. It's a much simpler process, and that you can be much more efficient with your time. And so it worked out okay. But yeah, if we hadn't understood that, they would have consistently gone, no, this won't work. This is too difficult. So sometimes it's just like understanding what people are really scared of and really what they're asking for. Yeah.
And I think you illustrated brilliantly in your talk, and there's a cycle. It's about listening to marketeers and product owners and service providers, but then reaching out to those customers and then bringing it around into the design and then going back again, listening to customers.
Yeah.
And that's the cycle, isn't it? It's
yeah,
trying to sort of
exactly.
keep that maintain that relationship and information flowing to sort of inform ongoing design. So, well, look, thank you very much for today's webinar.
You're so welcome.
I think we've come to the end of our session today with our time slots.
Oh yeah, I've got 5 minutes over. Thanks for those.
Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. If you've got any more questions, then do feed them into our different channels, our social channels, and we will be publishing this video shortly once we've done a few edits. And thank you again.
Lovely.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.